Hannah's life was painted in gold and silk. Every corner of her mansion spoke of wealth, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and lush Persian carpets. But for all its grandeur, the mansion was eerily quiet, her only companions the ticking of clocks and the rustle of curtains. It was a palace, yes, but one she ruled alone. She never expected love to come knocking in the form of Frederick, a young, dashing man in his 20s. He was everything she wasn't, full of life, humor, and charm. When he first approached her at a gala, she was immediately captivated by his bright eyes and easy laugh. They spent the evening talking about everything from art to philosophy, and Hannah, for the first time in years, felt truly seen. Over the next few weeks, Frederick became a regular presence in her life. He called her Hanny, a nickname that felt intimate, and he had a way of making her feel young again. Soon he was dropping by for dinners, and she eagerly awaited his visits, dressing in her finest clothes, her heart racing like a teenager's at the sound of his knock. But Frederick's charm wasn't his only appeal. He was ambitious, always talking about his business ventures. He had big dreams, if only he had a bit of capital to make them a reality. And Hannah, eager to support him, became his investor, transferring funds to him with little question. It wasn't about the money, it was about being a part of his dreams. As the relationship deepened, little inconsistencies began to emerge. Frederick often had urgent business calls during their time together. He'd excuse himself from the dinner table, stepping out to take these calls in private. At first, Hannah found it endearing. He was a busy man after all, with big responsibilities. But as weeks passed, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. Why couldn't he take the calls in front of her? One night, she mustered the courage to ask, "Frederick, why do you always step out for your calls?" Frederick chuckled, a smooth laugh that usually charmed her. "Oh, Hanny, you know how it is. Business requires discretion. Besides, I wouldn't want to bore you with the details." Hannah forced a smile, but a seed of doubt had been planted. She began to notice other things too. Sometimes Frederick wore new designer clothes even though he claimed to be struggling financially. Other times he would mention details that didn't quite align with what he'd previously told her. And there was the occasional slip of the tongue, a quick correction that made her wonder if he was hiding something. Driven by a need for reassurance, Hannah decided to surprise him one evening. Frederick had told her he'd be working from home all day, and she wanted to see him, to feel that spark that had drawn her to him in the first place. She arrived at his apartment with a bottle of his favorite wine, her heart pounding with anticipation. But as she approached the door, she heard laughter, a woman's laughter from inside. Hannah froze, her heart sinking. Before she could react, the door opened and a young woman stepped out. She was stunning, with a beauty that left Hannah feeling painfully aware of her own flaws. The woman's eyes scanned her, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize Frederick had guests," Hannah stammered, feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over her. The woman looked her up and down. "I'm Loretta," she said, her tone dismissive. "And you are?" "I'm Hannah, just a friend," Hannah replied, forcing a polite smile as her heart shattered inside. At that moment, Frederick appeared in the doorway. His face paled at the sight of Hannah, and for a second he looked like a cornered animal. But he quickly recovered, his face smoothing into a practiced smile. "Hanny, what a surprise," he said, wrapping an arm around Loretta's shoulder. "Loretta here is my cousin. She's just visiting." Hannah barely managed a response, too shaken to process what she'd seen. She left the apartment, her mind swirling with confusion and hurt. A cousin? She thought. But she knew what she'd seen in Loretta's eyes. A look of possession, of triumph. That wasn't the look a cousin gave. Hannah couldn't shake the images of Frederick with Loretta. The way they had looked at each other wasn't the way a man looked at a cousin. No, it was the look of lovers, of a secret being kept. That night her mind raced. What if she was just being paranoid? But her gut told her something was wrong. She needed answers. And for the first time, she realized that maybe she had been blind to the truth because she wanted so badly to believe in Frederick's love. Unable to sleep, she decided to take matters into her own hands. The next morning, she hired a private investigator. She didn't need to know everything, just enough to confirm her suspicions. A few days later, she received a report that would change everything. The investigator had dug into Frederick's life, and the truth was ugly. Frederick and Loretta weren't cousins. They were engaged. They had been in a secret relationship for months, and Frederick had been using his time with Hannah to fund a lavish life for Loretta, all while pretending to build a business empire with her money. The most damning evidence? A photo of him and Loretta on a luxury vacation, with Frederick's arm around her possessively, his eyes filled with adoration. Hannah stared at the report, her heart pounding. It felt as though the ground had been ripped from beneath her. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, had been using her all along. He wasn't the man she thought he was. He was a liar, a manipulator, and a fraud. The next few days passed in a blur. Hannah avoided Frederick's calls, his messages. She wasn't ready to face him yet. She needed to plan her next move. She had been foolish, blinded by affection and wealth. But now she was awake. And she wasn't going to let him get away with it. She decided to confront him, but not just to let him explain. No, this time, it was about taking control of her own fate. She would make sure Frederick understood that she wasn't the naive woman he thought she was. That evening, Frederick arrived at her mansion, unaware of the storm waiting for him. He was smiling as usual, his eyes full of warmth as he greeted her. "Hanny, I've missed you," he said, taking her hand in his. But Hannah wasn't fooled by the charm anymore. She looked at him, her eyes steely and cold. "I know what you've been doing, Frederick." He froze, his smile faltering. What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb with me," she snapped. "I know everything about you and Loretta. I know how you've been using me. You've been scamming me all along. My money, my trust. You've been using both to fund your life with her." Frederick's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. The smug confidence he had always carried was gone, replaced by panic. "Tell me, Frederick," Hannah continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "How long did you think you could keep this up? How long did you think you could play me for a fool?" Frederick swallowed hard, his eyes darting around as if looking for a way out. "Hanny, But Hannah wasn't finished. "No, you listen to me. You're nothing but a liar. And you thought I was some naive woman you could manipulate for your own gain. But I'm not. I've learned my lesson, Frederick." She picked up the phone and dialed a number, her fingers shaking only slightly. "I think it's time for your little game to come to an end." It wasn't long before the consequences of Frederick's actions started to unravel. Hannah had planned this carefully. She had ties to some powerful people, business partners, acquaintances in high places, and she used those connections to make sure Frederick's world would come crashing down. First, she leaked information about his fraudulent business deals, making sure that his so-called investors pulled out. Then, with the help of a few discreet contacts, she sabotaged the relationships he had built with important people. Within a week, Frederick's life had turned upside down. But Hannah didn't stop there. She knew Frederick was desperate, and desperation made people sloppy. She played the long game, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As Frederick's world crumbled, Loretta began to grow suspicious. She had started noticing that the lavish gifts and vacations had stopped. The romantic gestures were gone. And, most telling of all, Frederick was becoming distant, often lost in thought, his phone constantly buzzing with messages from people he didn't seem to want her to know about. One evening, Loretta decided to confront him. She found him at his apartment, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him before. "Frederick," she began, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What's going on? Why are you avoiding me?" Frederick looked up, his face a mask of guilt. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Loretta cut him off. "Don't lie to me. I know something is going on. You've been using me, haven't you? All this time you've been pretending to care about me. But it's all about the money, isn't it?" Frederick's eyes widened. "Loretta, please. I can explain." "No," she interrupted, her voice rising. "You've been playing me. I've been nothing but a pawn in your game. I was a fool, and now so are you." With those words, Loretta walked out, her heart shattered by the truth. With Loretta gone and Frederick now facing the consequences of his actions, it was time for Hannah to deliver the final blow. Frederick, humiliated and broken, showed up at her mansion one evening, his shoulders slumped, his eyes defeated. He had nothing left, not even his pride. He begged Hannah for forgiveness, promising that he'd learned his lesson. But Hannah wasn't moved by his pleas. You think you can just walk back into my life like nothing happened? Like you didn't lie to me, use me, and break my heart?" Her voice was calm, but each word was like a nail in Frederick's coffin. "You thought you could control me," she continued, "but I'm the one who's been controlling this whole situation from the start." Frederick's eyes were filled with desperation, but Hannah wasn't moved. "Leave, Frederick. You've lost everything. Your money, your future, and most of all, my respect." With that, she turned away, leaving Frederick standing in the cold, realizing that he had played his final card and lost. The next few weeks felt like an eternity to Hannah. The shock of Frederick's betrayal still lingered, but she knew she had come out victorious in the end. She had reclaimed her dignity, her wealth, and her sense of self. But while Hannah had moved on, Frederick's downfall wasn't over. The repercussions of his actions continued to ripple through his life, each wave growing more powerful. His so-called business empire had collapsed, and he was now facing financial ruin. But it wasn't just his finances that were destroyed. It was his reputation, too. Hannah had made sure that his name was smeared across the media, his fraudulent activities exposed to the public. The people he had once fooled were no longer on his side. As his former partners and investors turned their backs on him, he became a pariah in the business world. People whispered about him in the streets. He was no longer the charming, ambitious young man he had once been. He was a cautionary tale. But the real blow came when Frederick realized the truth of his situation. He had lost Loretta, too. The woman he had used and manipulated, the one he had once thought he could control, had walked away from him. And now he had no one left. One evening, after weeks of trying to salvage what little remained of his life, Frederick showed up at Hannah's mansion once more. This time there was no charm in his eyes, no warm smile. He was broken, defeated. "Hanny," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I'm sorry. I've lost everything. You were right about everything. I was selfish and cruel. Please, I don't know what to do anymore." Hannah, sitting in the same grand room where they had once laughed and shared intimate moments, looked at him with cold eyes. The man before her was not the one she had once loved. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pitiful desperation. He had gambled everything and lost it all. "You made your choice, Frederick," she said, her voice steady, "and now you're facing the consequences." Frederick fell to his knees, his hands trembling. "Please, just give me a chance. I'll do anything. Please." But Hannah wasn't moved. She had nothing left to give him. "You had your chance," she said, her voice laced with finality, "and you wasted it. Now go." Months passed. Frederick disappeared from the social scene. He was a shadow of the man he once was, his name no longer associated with success or charm. As the years went by, he became a cautionary tale for those who had once admired him. The young man who had risen to the top with lies and manipulation had fallen hard, and no one, not even the people who had once been close to him, was willing to offer him a hand. Meanwhile, Hannah had rebuilt her life. She continued to thrive, her business ventures flourishing, and she moved on from the heartbreak. But there was something about Frederick's downfall that lingered in her mind. It wasn't the victory that mattered. It was the fact that she had outsmarted him. She had played the game better than he had ever expected. And then, one fateful night, while dining at a high-end restaurant, she saw him, Frederick. He looked nothing like the man she had once known. His clothes were worn, his hair unkempt, and his face was gaunt with the weight of his failures. He was sitting alone, staring into his glass of wine as though lost in thought, unaware of her gaze from across the room. For a moment, their eyes met. Frederick's eyes widened, a flash of recognition crossing his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Hannah simply stood up, her gaze never leaving his. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. She knew in that moment she had won. As time passed, Hannah found peace. The bitterness of Frederick's betrayal had faded, and in its place she realized that the greatest lesson she had learned wasn't about revenge. It was about knowing her worth. She had allowed herself to fall for someone who had taken advantage of her. But in the end, she had come out stronger, wiser, and more powerful than ever. The mansion that had once felt so lonely now felt like a home again. She spent her days focusing on her businesses, traveling, and enjoying life on her own terms. She had no need for a man to define her happiness. She was complete in herself. One evening, as she sat on the balcony overlooking the city, sipping a glass of wine, she thought about how far she had come. She had learned the hard way that trust could be broken, but she had also learned that she was unbreakable. And as the city lights twinkled below her, Hannah smiled to herself. Frederick thought he had won, but in the end, I was always the one in control. Dear viewers, what lessons did you take away from this dramatic love tales? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with friends, and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest update. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.